The Kingdom Building Station. Trials and Triumphs with Pastor Ladina Boo, a program that takes a hard look at the hard topics that affect our children and our families. Gender ideology, diversity, critical race theory, just to name a few. It is time for our churches and our families to be informed and proactive so we can get back to the original foundations our nation was founded on. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on MTM Broadcasting. Trials and Triumphs, a program that takes a hard look at the hard topics with Pastor Ladina Boo.
Good morning. My name is Ladina Boo from Stockton, Missouri, and I want to thank you for joining me today for Trials and Triumphs. I will stay up front that the views expressed in this podcast are opinions of myself and any guest if I have some, and do not necessarily reflect the views of MTM Broadcasting or its affiliates. If you've been listening to my shows here on MTM Broadcasting, then you know I often get into subjects that you might not be aware of, or if you are aware, you don't know the nitty-gritty behind it. But I honestly hope to educate you on certain things going on around us that are destroying our nation. Since the United States has declared June as Pride Month, we can expect the usual parades with drag queens and trans rights activists attempting to lure your children into a dangerous cult. I see absolutely no reason for parents to take their children to these extremely sexualized events. I see absolutely no reason for parents to take children to drag shows, and I definitely and vehemently oppose the current school systems around our nation that bring in drag queens to our schools to allow our children to put on drag shows in our public school settings. And we should always remember that last June, the Pride event participants were shouting, "We're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children." They were telling you straight out what their plans are. I study this stuff pretty much daily in preparation for this podcast. I read every report I can get my hands on. And so today I want to discuss one of the lies you have heard repeated over and over by the trans rights people who apparently have swallowed the blue pill offered by Morpheus in The Matrix. I want to offer you the red pill, which represents themes of illusion versus reality and fate versus free will. The red pill is the path of critical thinking, science, and philosophy, while the blue pill represents emotional decision-making, and uncritical belief. Morpheus tells Neo, "This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back." You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Now, I've talked with many transitioned people and detransitioners, and, I am standing with them and trying to keep us from transitioning children. I want to relay to you information from two transitioners at this point that they were adults when they did it. They've been living secretly as men. They started out as women for over 23 years, but they did their transition as adults, like I said. But after living in secrecy, with nothing to gain but everything to lose, these trans individuals stepped forward and boldly declare, no, the medical transition of a child is not acceptable, and they will not stand for it. And they want to elaborate on their reasons why. Myself, I came across a tweet last night from a trans woman speaking out against childhood medical transition. It reminded me of a familiar pattern that I've witnessed for a number of years now. The person was immediately attacked by everyone. The trans community members labeled them as a traitor and accused them of losing sight of their identity, while the gay community called them a homophobic asshole. An evangelical individual chimed in with judgments, saying they were a hypocrite for discussing trans kids while being a trans adult and wishing for them to burn in hell. Even liberals denounced the person for going against their own community and joining the extreme ideology of the far right. It's not surprising to encounter many trans adults who have regrets and would never go through transition again, but simply can't handle the constant attacks and discrimination. However, it's these personal stories that have the power to change perspectives and inspire empathy. If we shut them out at the first sign of struggle, their voices will be lost. Several days ago, a pro football player stood on the stage, his voice booming with fervent conviction as he delivered a commencement speech. He proudly proclaims his devout evangelical beliefs and credits his wife's happiness to her role as mother, wife, and caregiver for their family. In the same breath, he condemns the LGBTQ community, declaring their existence to be a sin that will lead them straight to hell. His words drip with venom and intolerance, causing tension and discomfort in the audience, but praised by the Christian community. To stop the medical transition of children, we need individuals who can educate those in society who are misinformed, people who have the power to change hearts and minds. This task is by far the most challenging, as it requires precise wording and strong emotional connection to truly awaken people's minds. Sadly, what I often witness are individuals who only preach to the choir, failing to reach a wider audience. We must utilize our talents and not become repetitive robots preaching to the same people. A group of Christians who oppose childhood medical transition attend a speech from another Christian who agrees with them and cements they are all right in accomplishing nothing. I often criticize evangelicals, even though I am a pastor, because they have the power and resources to bring about change quickly, yet they are choosing leaders who only stir up their followers. This has resulted in 22 state bills being either blocked or met with sanctions to continue, or with sanctuaries to continue to medically transition children. In summary, these states are not enforcing laws against transgender kids transitioning, and every month the number of kids at, say, the William Institute who believe they are transgender continues to rise. The people that need to be educated are often found among the liberals and left-leaning groups within our communities. So we have to choose between what we're going to say and who we're going to say it to. And as Christians, we must stand up and voice our discontent with this and voice that we do not need to change our children. God does not make mistakes. So anyway, despite all the money and resources being thrown towards Christian feminist activists, there seems to be a lack of progress in changing hearts and minds. In fact, it feels like we're moving backwards. It's frustrating because I can't seem to wake people up to the reality of the situation. The sheer audacity and cruelty of allowing this to persist, I just can't understand it, okay? The fight may feel like it's being won, but in truth, we're losing. Behind closed doors, big pharmaceuticals continue to rake in unimaginable amounts of money, while 257 bills have flown through state houses this year alone, undoing the hard-won protections for stopping childhood medical transition. And they don't stop there. They are already 3 steps ahead, devising new ways to keep harming these innocent kids legally. So I ask you, do you truly want to eradicate the twisted influence of the LGBTQ from our schools? Do you want to put an end to the cruel practice of childhood medical transition? Then we must do different, adult better, and promote people to the talent to change hearts and minds. Stop blindly following leaders who do more harm than good, and raise your voice together. Reach your hand out further, because right now we're losing the battle against those who profit off of hurting our children. In this current state of chaos and turmoil, it is evident that we are in desperate need of new leaders. It seems that the only noteworthy accomplishments being made are those who are becoming rich and famous, while innocent children continue to be senselessly butchered at alarming rates each day. Furthermore, we are witnessing a steady increase in the number of LGBTQ lessons being taught in schools across the United States. Every day, these numbers tick higher and higher until it becomes impossible to ignore the gravity of this situation. Perhaps it's time for us to take a step back and reevaluate our approach before it's too late. Now, I want to talk about suicidality, and I'll get to that point here just in a few moments, but I want to relay the story of a woman named Harley, and she medically transitioned some years back. She was an adult when she did it, but, listening to her story and what she went through will maybe help you understand why we should not be putting our children through this. Harley's medical transition story begins with that in 1986, Harley lived as a masculine lesbian who enjoyed driving trucks and motorcycles. One day at work, she met a transgender woman who suggested that she consider sex reassignment surgery. It was a daunting thought, and Harley didn't know where to begin. A decade earlier, a coworker had responded to an advertisement in the newspaper seeking volunteers for experimental sex reassignment surgery at Stanford University Medical Center. She met a transgender man who also applied, and they both underwent the procedure together. However, the trans man faced numerous complications from phalloplasty surgery and ended up spending several months in the hospital due to infections and additional surgeries. In the year 1987, Harley attended a gathering for gay women in Alcoholics Anonymous, where she listened to another transgender man share his story. He had made the difficult decision to stop taking testosterone after a few years because of his son's illness. He wanted to be there for his child as a mother. Meanwhile, although Harley had been sober for 7 years, she felt like her life was at a standstill. That's when it hit her. Medical transition was her ticket out. She could no longer imagine living as a lesbian. Back then, everything was spread by word of mouth, and there was no internet or cell phones to access information. However, Harley managed to find someone who knew how to help her with her gender transition. For $150 per session, she began seeing a local psychiatrist for hormone therapy and surgery recommendations. On just her second visit, that psychiatrist wrote her a letter to begin hormone replacement therapy and undergo gender confirmation surgery as soon as possible. And so in January of 1988, at the age of 32, Harley started injecting herself with testosterone. By April of that same year, she had undergone a double mastectomy. But once that surgery was over with, she never went back to see the psychiatrist again. At that time in history, insurance didn't cover any expenses related to hormone therapy or gender confirmation surgeries, and those costs were expected to be paid up front with cash. So in order to afford all the treatments, hospital stays, surgeon fees, and anesthesiologist services, Harley worked long hours and pushed herself beyond her limits. The surgeon who performed her surgery only offered metoidioplasty procedures at that time, but it seemed like her best option. Information about transgender issues and transition was scarce without access to the internet or even cell phones, but the institution where she underwent surgery had a reputation for successfully performing sex reassignment procedures. There she met another transgender man who had undergone gender confirmation surgery, and while he was not completely satisfied with the results, he eventually learned to live with it after multiple revisions. Harley didn't think that same thing would happen to her because she trusted her surgeons and thought that they were highly skilled and knowledgeable about these procedures. Unfortunately, Harley was naive to believe that her operation would turn out any better than the other gentleman's. Harley underwent metoidoplasty surgery between 1990 and 1991, but there were complications that required further treatment. The surgeon demanded payment before offering any additional help, but by then Harley had run out of money and was physically and emotionally exhausted from working long hours and undergoing multiple surgeries. All she wanted at that point was to move on with her life. So despite the complications, Harley chose to ignore them and focus instead on her job as a long-haul truck driver, putting in countless miles on the road. After 9 long years, in 2001, Harley finally received the necessary medical treatment for a fistula and the related complications from scar tissue. Scar tissue can gradually cause major issues over time and can continue to reoccur. As the years went by, Harley started experiencing difficulty with urination and other bodily systems began to fail. It was a roller coaster of panic attacks and high blood pressure with no control over when they would strike or where. Despite seeking help from doctors who ran numerous tests and prescribed various medications, her condition persisted. Excuse me. It wasn't until 2012 that she learned about strictures in her urethra, which required surgery to fix 5 blockages and potential bladder damage. After the procedure, it was revealed that back in 1990, the surgeon had used improper materials to create a new pathway for her urethra, resulting in hairs growing inside it. The surgeon apologized and informed her that it would never work properly. However, by 2014, the pain became unbearable, and Harley made the difficult decision to have the original urethra reopened so that she could urinate without pain. I've talked to a number of people who have transitioned male to female, and one of the major problems and difficulties they have is the inability to urinate without pain, and they will have to go into a restroom, and it may take them 30 minutes in order to even start a stream of urine. These surgeries are painful and dangerous. So anyway, back to Harley. Fixing her plumbing issues did not solve all of her problems. She still had to deal with bouts of anxiety, irregular heartbeat, palpitations, and frequent and urgent urination. At night, she would suffer from hot flashes and excessive sweating. She went through multiple doctors and tried different medications, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, a health practitioner suggested that her problem was due to synthetic testosterone. Unfortunately, she had run out of funds and could no longer afford to see the doctor for further treatment. After realizing the negative effects of taking testosterone on her own, she made the decision to stop. However, this brought about a wave of unpleasant symptoms: pains in her bones and muscles, stiffness, joint inflammation, digestive problems, mood swings, exhaustion, heart palpitations, memory and focus difficulties, and more. Eventually, Harley couldn't take it anymore and sought help from a doctor. Her blood test showed extremely low hormone levels. The doctor told her that living like this was not sustainable and suggested bioidentical hormones through surgical implants. Desperate for relief, Harley underwent these procedures of having pellets implanted into her body. It wasn't a smooth experience, as the release of hormones from the pellets was timed and caused fluctuations in her symptoms. After the doctor implanted the final pellets in her buttocks, she miscalculated and inserted too many. This resulted in dangerously high levels of testosterone, over 1,500, coursing through her body. The only advice the doctor gave was to drink water and rest, but that wasn't enough. The time-released pellets caused her blood pressure to skyrocket at night when her endocrine system was most active, leading to episodes of tachycardia, a heart rate over 100 beats per minute. And for 2 weeks, she was taken to the hospital by ambulance almost every night. She feared that these incidents would overwhelm her cardiovascular system and possibly lead to death. It's a constant experiment with hormones and surgeries to change a female body into a more masculine one, and it has been a difficult journey confronting health professionals about the reality of medical transition. Hormones and scar tissue are now ongoing issues that Harley will have to manage for the rest of her life. In 1987, someone warned her that her journey would amplify everything in life by a factor of 10, for better or worse. The beginning was fantastic. She felt fresh and thrilling. She finally had the freedom to be herself and chase after her dreams. But then bottom surgery came along and everything changed. Her life became consumed with medical challenges and a future full of uncertainty. One of the things that the doctors tell you is if you take a child in, that if you don't do this, they're going to become suicidal. To me, what Harley has gone through would make a person suicidal. You can't negate that fact. One of the most blatant and atrocious lies put forth by those in the field of gender-affirming care, which is still being pushed today, is, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? I've had those words screamed at me in my face by a trans rights activist, though in truth, since they always have their faces covered, I equate them more to Antifa than anyone concerned with the youth of our nation. I have also heard that puberty blockers are completely reversible and do no harm to children, another blatant lie from the uninformed. I stand firm on the scriptures in 2 Timothy 2:15, where it says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness. The Lord wants us to study everything, learn more about Him, and learn how to distinguish truth from error. Therefore, I study everything I can get my hands on, and gender-affirming care is harmful and dangerous to our children. At this time, England may be the third country to withdraw from a gender-affirming treatment path due to recommendations from the Cass Review. It was released in April of 2024 and has been called the most comprehensive summary on transgender youth medicine, according to the psychologist Erica Anderson. The review was chaired by Dr. Hilary Cass, a British honorary physician, consultant in pediatric disability, and former president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, and she stated that there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate the long-term benefits of medicalizing children who want to identify as a different gender. Instead, the review recommends focusing on psychotherapy. The National Health Services of England, which commissioned the report in 2020, stated it would be committed to following through on the recommendations, saying the Cass Review final report will not just shape the future of healthcare in this country for children and young people experiencing gender distress, but will be of major international importance and significance. 8 days after the Cass Review's release, Scotland's health boards announced a pause on new prescriptions for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones as they gather evidence to support the safety and clinical effectiveness of these medications. Unfortunately, the United States appears to be ignoring the Cass Review completely and keeps hurtling headfirst into the unnecessary destruction of our children. The Cass Review is based on the work of 237 papers, including 214 studies, 21 guidelines, and 2 position statements, which cover data of over 113,000 children and young people. The authors also analyzed data from over 3,700 children diagnosed with gender dysphoria, survey responses from professionals, and numerous interviews and testimonies. The Cass Review team commissioned researchers at the University of York to conduct systematic reviews of these papers and get feedback by interviewing young gender-incongruent children, their parents, and clinicians. Additionally, Dr. Cass also interviewed numerous transgender youth, adult parents of these children, advocacy groups, psychologists, pediatricians, and related clinicians, both British and international. She wanted to do a follow-up with 9,000 patients referred to England's Tavistock Center, but that could not be done due to the lack of cooperation from all but one adult clinic. The Cass Review found insufficient and inconclusive evidence demonstrating the effectiveness and benefits of gender reassignment treatments for children. Additionally, many of these children are on the autism spectrum and share mental comorbidities often overshadowed by the medicalization mode. Dr. Cass hence advised cautionary psychological interventions while also leaving room for children to explore their identities. The Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, a medical group that advocates for evidence-driving research on transgender care, stated that for England, the Cass Review marked the end of an era of highly medicalized approaches to the treatment of young people with gender-related distress, which has come to be known as gender-affirming care. The report also mentions that while medicalization comprising puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery, known as the Dutch Protocol, was invented in the Netherlands in the 1990s. The concept of gender affirmation, accepting children's gender identity at face value, actually originated in the United States and then spread internationally. As a result of the Cass Review, children under 18 in England will not be treated using such protocol, but with the same level of care as other youth with mental health struggles. Finland and Sweden made similar changes in 2023. Puberty blockers and hormones will only be made available to 16-year-olds and older under the context of research-controlled conditions. Their experimentation of such treatment on minors will be hindered. I've said it before, and my thoughts are confirmed in the Cass Review, wherein the report found that, unexpectedly, most current influential guidelines have been determined based on board consensus instead of science. Most of the current guidelines were influenced by two American standards of care, the 2012 World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare, WPATH, and the Endocrine Society 2009. Both relied on consensus process among professionals to decide the best treatment for gender dysphoria and were built upon one another. WPATH's members were co-sponsors of the Endocrine Society guidelines. WPATH's 2012 Standards of Care adopted the Endocrine Society's consensus-based recommendations, but did not refer to WPATH's own systematic review data, which found inconclusive evidence of the benefits of hormone therapy. The recommendations from these guidelines were then referred to by subsequent guidelines, snowballing into what we see now. These people were not doing science, okay? They had a board with numerous transgender people on them in some respects, and they just decided to put these standards out there because of their opinions. There is no science involved in this WPATH, I call it WARPATH, excuse me, the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare. They did not use science. It was a consensus of people sitting around and talking. Now, I specifically want to talk today about the lies told by the transgender activists that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones are completely reversible, and the lies about if you don't provide gender-affirming care that your child will become suicidal. Exactly how far from sanity have we actually fallen? If you talk with physicians, psychologists, and detransitioners, you will find that puberty blockers have many adverse effects on children. Short-term effects may include swelling at the site of the shot, weight gain, hot flashes, headaches, and mood changes. Can we look at the sudden increase in transgender violence as being caused by these puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones? I did a previous show regarding violence after the use of cross-sex hormones and the number of mass shootings perpetrated by persons identifying as transgender in our nation these days. The use of puberty blockers might also have long-term effects on growth spurts, bone growth, bone density, and fertility. As a result, most persons on puberty blockers see their sexual organs atrophy, which creates issues if someone continues on their transgender surgery path and they don't have enough skin to accommodate later surgeries they may want. It also means that when a girl's sexual organs atrophy, if she is not sterilized by the use of puberty blockers, she will have a smaller uterus and may have horrible issues with giving birth. Most will end up having a C-section if they can get pregnant at all. Start those puberty blockers too soon and a boy's sexual organs will atrophy, creating mental stress later if he chooses to stop the blockers and finally comes to the realization that he now has a penis that is the size of a 5-year-old child instead of the man he was supposed to be. Excuse me. Many will be sterile when they decide to get off the puberty blockers. I've spoken with numerous detransitioners that worry about whether they will ever be able to have children because of what has been done to their bodies. It's heartbreaking. In addition, a lot of these individuals will have osteoporosis at a young age. Starting these treatments does nothing but make your child a permanent patient if they don't become outright suicidal in their actions. A recent study has found that the risk of suicide, self-harm, and post-traumatic stress disorder for individuals who have undergone gender transition surgeries are significantly higher than among those who have not had surgery. So how does that match the earlier lie of do you want a dead son or a live daughter? The study was conducted by researchers. A new study was conducted by researchers at the University of Texas Medical Branch. They found that individuals who had undergone gender transition surgery experienced these adverse effects at more than 12 times the rate of those who did not have a history of gender transition surgery. The study examined data from nearly 16 million U.S. adult patients between the ages of 18 and 60 who went to an emergency room for treatment from 2003 to 2023. This data came from a larger database of over 90 million patients from 56 healthcare facilities. Researchers then isolated data from 1,501 patients who had undergone gender transition surgery at some point in the 5 years before their emergency room visit, and 15,608,363 patients who had no history of gender transition surgery, as well as 2 additional control groups. The data shows that 3.47% of the patients who had undergone gender reassignment surgery were treated for suicide attempts, compared to 0.29% of patients who did not have that history, a difference of 12.12 times. The study does not clarify at what age the patients attempted suicide or engaged in self-harm, but it does make it clear that it did not include minors. The study lacks explanations as to why these patients had higher rates of suicidality, self-harm, and PTSD, and does not cite whether the patients suffered from adverse mental conditions before surgery. Unfortunately for our children, the American Academy of Pediatrics reaffirmed its support of gender transition for minors in August of 2023. Julie Quist, board chair of the Child Protection League, said the results of the study were deeply disturbing. She also said it raises serious implications in the health industry, mental health industry, and education system, which have almost universally adopted the affirmation-only approach as the best treatment for gender dysphoria in children and teens. I completely am against the affirmation-only approach, and a lot of doctors are standing up against it these days, too. Ms. Quist also said she was stunned by the 12.12 times higher rate of suicide attempt risk, recalling how parents who are reportedly coerced into allowing their children to undergo these irreversible surgeries are often asked questions such as, do you want a live daughter or a dead son? Implying if they don't allow their children to medically transition, the child will be more likely to kill themselves. Ms. Quist said she also was struck by the fact that the study avoided researching the rate of attempted suicide and self-harm among minors under the age of 18. If suicide attempts for those who have transitioned are happening at this rate among those over 18, it is counterintuitive to assume that it's not happening at the same rate, if not higher, among children and teens. Think of all the parents who are being told that affirming is the only answer and that surgeries are safe and prevent suicide. It's a tool of manipulation that is completely false, and the depth of the deception is breathtaking. They've weaponized the idea of suicide to coerce people in doing exactly the wrong thing. Bernadette Broyles is the founder, president, and general counsel for the Child and Parental Rights Campaign. She said it's illogical to assume that minors who undergo gender transition through surgery and medicalization would wait until they were 18 to attempt suicide or self-harm. Whatever dynamic is present in adults stressing about their sexual transition would only be exacerbated in children because they are still in the process of development. Just because this study didn't include children under the age of 18 does not mean it has no relevance to children under the age of 18. Ms. Broyles indicated that she would expect heightened effect among children because they are emotionally and physically more vulnerable to negative impacts. Ms. Broyles said she was impressed that the researchers had the integrity to publish their findings, and she also said she was disappointed by their attempt to explain, without any valid evidence, that the reason for the alarmingly high rate of attempted suicide among those who had undergone these surgeries is related to minority bias, discrimination, and relational stresses. Ms. Broyle argues that those were pulled out of thin air. There is no evidence to support that, and they're choosing to ignore the elephant in the room, namely that the surgery itself is causing the suicide attempts. At a minimum, she said, the study confirms that transitioning did not bring the happiness the patients were promised. That's also how parents are coerced and cudgeled into giving consent, Ms. Broyle said. Yet perversely, they are correlated with an alarmingly high rate of suicide risk. If nothing else, this is one more study that removes the legitimacy and justification for giving these surgeries is that it is going to save the person from suicide. The Trevor Project is a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on suicide prevention and crisis intervention among LGBT youth. I personally do not agree with their findings, but they published a study in 2021 in the Journal of Adolescent Health concluding that minors who received gender-affirming hormone therapy had lower rates of depression and attempted suicide than those who wished to receive them but didn't. But another study suggests that most minors experiencing gender confusion grow out of it by the time they reach adulthood. Researchers at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands recently released the results of a study analyzing survey data from 2,772 adolescents over a span of 15 years, starting at age 11. The studies found that in early adolescence, 11% of participants reported gender non-contentedness. However, the prevalence had decreased to 4% by the time they reached the age of 26. Gender non-contentedness, while being relatively common during early adolescence, in general decreases with age and appears to be associated with a poorer self-concept and mental health throughout development. While there has been a long-standing debate over whether minors with gender confusion should be treated with mental health techniques or gender transition intervention, the discussion was heightened in April with the release of the 388-page Cass Review. Dr. Cass wrote in the British Medical Journal, LBMJ, that the pillars of gender medicine are built on shaky foundations. Dr. Patrick Lappert, a certified plastic and reconstructive surgeon for more than 25 years, said that the findings of the University of Texas study are conclusive. They looked at a large cohort of patients who had the fullness of affirmation care, including gender affirmation surgery, and what they found is that persons who have had all of the affirmation care still have a suicidality of over 12-fold likelihood. It also noted that a similar study published by Sweden researchers in 2011 found similar results showing a higher rate of suicide and increased need for inpatient psychiatric care among people who underwent gender reassignment surgery. With all these studies and others showing a higher rate of suicide attempts and death by suicide among those who undergo gender reassignment surgery, Dr. Lappert said that doctors who perform these procedures can no longer claim that the treatments reduce suicidality. For affirmation-only advocates who may point to the fact that the suicide rates in recent studies did not include minors, Dr. Lappert noted that gender affirmation is an industrial process. It starts with the young and very confused, and it leads inexorably from one step to the next. They're eventually going to have the surgery because they've been convinced that that is where their happiness lies. But then they will see that in their own lives, the harms that have happened because of what these clinics and doctors have been recommending. Dr. Lappert said it will become increasingly more difficult as individuals and parents start suing those who promote and perform these surgeries. While he said he doesn't believe that the study proves that the surgery itself harmed or helped the individuals who attempted suicide, he said it does prove that people who undergo transgender surgery are very likely to harm themselves. If you think about it, he added, transgender surgery is a form of self-harm. So it shouldn't be surprising that people who do that to themselves when they run out of hope might kill themselves. The transgender treatment industry tells them, here's how we're going to solve all your sorrow. They give them social affirmation. They provide them with safe, affirming community to live in. They give them drugs and surgery. But when they run out of things to offer, the psychological problem is still there. They never examined it. They've never asked themselves why a person would have gender dysphoria. They just affirm and bill, and it's a huge industry. But that will be coming to an end. I must agree that it will be coming to an end because numerous detransitioners have been granted the right to sue the physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, and hospitals that performed these surgeries on them when they were minors. I also want to discuss a study published in the Journal of Urology, which stated that attempted suicide rates among people who identified as transgender more than doubled after receiving a vaginoplasty. The study analyzed the rates of psychiatric emergencies before and after gender-altering surgery among 869 males who underwent vaginoplasty and 357 females who underwent phalloplasty in California from 2012 to 2018. Researchers found the rates of psychiatric emergencies were high both before and after gender-altering surgeries, with similar overall rates in both groups. However, suicide attempts were markedly higher in those who received vaginoplasties. The study authors wrote, in fact, our observed rate of suicide attempts in the phalloplasty group is actually similar to the general population, while the vaginoplasties group rate is more than double that of the general population. Among the 869 patients who underwent vaginoplasty, 38 patients attempted suicide, with 9 attempts before surgery and 25 after surgery, and 4 attempts before and after surgery. Researchers found a 1.5% overall risk of suicide before vaginoplasty and a 3.3% risk after the procedure. Almost 3% of those who attempted suicide after undergoing vaginoplasty did not present with a risk of suicide prior to surgery. Among the 357 biologically female patients who underwent phalloplasty, there were 6 suicide attempts with a 0.8% risk of suicide before and after surgery. Overall, the proportion of those who experienced an emergency room and inpatient psychiatric encounter outside of suicide attempts was similar between the vaginoplasty and phalloplasty groups. Approximately 22.2% and 20.7% of patients, respectively, experienced at least one psychiatric encounter. The study found that 33.9% chance that a biological man undergoing vaginoplasty would experience a psychiatric encounter post-surgery, compared with a 26.5% chance for biological women who underwent phalloplasty if an episode had occurred before surgery. The authors stressed the importance of counseling biological males undergoing a feminizing transition with a history of psychiatric emergencies. In an interview with Dr. Alfonso Oliva, a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgery, said research into the psychiatric outcomes and long-term follow-up of those who have had sex reassignment surgery is lacking, but an important paper is worth mentioning. In 2011 paper published by PLOS One, researchers found that people who underwent sex reassignment surgery had substantially high rates of overall mortality, suicidal behavior, and psychiatric morbidity compared to the general population. Dr. Oliva went on to say, it's hard to refute this paper because it's a longitudinal study. In Sweden, where the paper was written, Everyone is in a database, and through diagnosis codes, they're able to follow what happens to every citizen in terms of their medical history. They waited more than 10 years after people had surgery and found that death by suicide had an adjusted hazard ratio of 19 to 1. You can quibble about emergency room encounters, but this study shows that for patients who had transgender surgery, their suicide rate after 10 years was 19-fold higher than the general population. Additionally, the study excluded people with psychiatric illnesses, so these are individuals thought to have no psychiatric illness out of gender dysphoria. A phalloplasty is a multi-step process undertaken by a biological female who wants to transition to male, where a penis is created using tissue from the genitals, forearm, or thigh. The external genitals, such as the labia and the outer labia, are used to create a scrotum, and testicular implants are inserted months later along with an implant that will cause erections. Vaginoplasty is the most commonly performed gender reassignment surgery for those with gender dysphoria, with more than 3,000 procedures performed annually. According to Johns Hopkins Medicine, vaginoplasty is a surgical procedure that involves removing the penis and testicles and scrotum to create a vulva and functional vagina. Surgeons typically create a vaginal canal using the skin surrounding the existing penis and scrotum, or by using a skin graft from the abdomen or thigh. A penial inversion is the most commonly performed procedure, where the skin is removed from the penis and inverted to form a pouch that is inserted into the vaginal cavity created by the urethra and the rectum. Surgeons then partially remove, shorten, and reposition the urethra and could create a labia majora, labia minor, and clitoris. Other surgical methods involve using a robotic system that enables surgeons to reach into the body through a small incision in the belly button to create a vaginal canal. The type of vaginoplasty performed varies among patients. For example, a younger patient who had never experienced puberty may have insufficient penile skin to do a standard penile inversion. When you take a child who is about to undergo puberty and they suggest giving puberty blockers to stop puberty at age 10 to 11 and a half, and when you do that for little boys, they aren't able to get tissue from the penis and scrotum, so creating a vagina is difficult. They have to use tissue from other areas of the body, such as the peritoneum or the colon. Some researchers in Brazil are actually looking into using tilapia fish. If this isn't bad enough, if it wasn't bad enough to smell like crap all day long by using part of the colon, now they want to add a fishy smell by using fish. Lord help us. After vaginoplasty is performed, the recovery process is extensive, and vaginal dilation must be performed at various intervals throughout the patient's life. In addition to an increased risk of suicide, vaginoplasty is associated with numerous physical complications, including wound separation, vaginal stenosis, hematoma, rectovaginal fistulas, granulation tissue, bleeding, infection, skin or clitoral necrosis, suture-lined dehiscence when the surgical incision opens up, and urinary retention or vaginal prolapse. I've seen vaginal prolapse in my cows, okay? They give birth, and then their entire uterus falls out of their backside, and, a lot of times you have to end up putting down the cow. So vaginal prolapse for someone who has gone through this gender affirmation surgery really disturbs me. According to a 2021 paper in the International Brazilian Journal of Urology, a rectovaginal fistula is the most devastating complication of a vaginoplasty that can occur despite careful technique and without obvious injury to the rectum. A rectovaginal fistula is an abnormal connection between the rectum and vagina that causes fecal incontinence, hygiene issues, vaginal or anal irritation, and potentially life-threatening abscesses and fistula reoccurrence. In 2021 review in Andrology found that rates of complications following penile and vaginoplasty ranged from 20 to 70%, with most of the complications occurring during the first 4 months following the procedure. In 2018, the Clinical Anatomy Review and Meta-Analysis researchers reviewed 125 articles to assess neovaginal complications following surgery. After selecting 13 studies that included 1,684 patients, they found a complication rate of 32% with a reoperation rate of 22% for non-aesthetic reasons. For cosmetic surgery, if the complication rate was more than 2 or 3%, you wouldn't have any patients, according to Dr. Oliva. These are very high percentage rates that we just accept. Dr. Oliva also said complications with these surgical procedures are very high, and he thinks this is why suicide rates are so high. People think this is going to solve the problem, and it doesn't. In a June 2018 paper on postoperative outcomes of 117 patients who underwent vaginoplasty, published in the Journal of American Society of Plastic Surgeons, found that 26% of patients experienced granulation tissue, 20% had intravaginal scarring, and 20% experienced prolonged pain. In a 2017 paper published in the Journal of Urology, researchers followed patients who underwent penile inversion vaginoplasty. Of 330 patients, 95, that's 29%, presented with postoperative complications. 3 of those patients developed a rectovaginal fistula, and 30 patients required a second operation. In a 2016 study published in Urology, researchers retrospectively reviewed clinical records of 69 patients who underwent vaginoplasty from January 2005 to January 2015. Although complications during surgery were not reported, 22% of the patients experienced major postoperative complications. We've been transitioning adults in the United States quite frequently since 2007. But where is the data from gender identity clinics? Why is nothing published in the United States about long-term function? Why do we have nothing published on sexual function? We should be able to follow that, and we should be studying it, and we're not, according to Dr. Oliva. We've got to understand that our children are not able to make these decisions as children. And if you want to continue affirming your child's cross-sex ideology, then you're harming your child. And, personally, I would really prefer that, a foster care system took care of your child if you think that transitioning them is a good idea. And if you fall for the lies of do you want a dead daughter or a live son, then you've got issues anyway. These are all lies. There's more suicidality after surgery than before. And, you cannot allow these people to manipulate you in this fashion. It's not good for you. It's not good for your kids. There is more and more evidence coming out on a daily basis about the dangers of transitioning. And, they want to say that people don't commit suicide after they change their sex. That's a blatant lie. It's 19-1 after you've had surgery. There's no reason for us to continue this, and we need to stop it now. Everybody in society, our churches, and so forth, we need to stand up and say no more ever to child transitioning. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you again next time.
Come, Holy Spirit.